Hello, welcome to Wellingborough Climate Action Project's Food and Waste Workshop. Today we're talking about sustainable food and waste. During our workshop we'll be looking at it in 6 areas: sustainable food, food not wasted, packaging, litter, rubbish, and reduce, reuse, repair and recycle. Let's kick off with sustainable food. We've all heard about carbon footprints, but it's not just about fossil fuels. Did you know that your carbon footprint could actually be your biggest source of carbon in your daily life? If you look at the graph, 24% of carbon emissions globally are from agriculture, forestry and land use. This is the second biggest portion of the pie if you're talking about global greenhouse gas emissions. In the UK, food is the second largest contributor to individual carbon footprints. This is caused by various stages in the life cycle of foodstuffs. So how does food contribute to our carbon footprint? Here are the 5 life cycles of food. So production, the fertilizers, pesticides, animal feed, water and other materials like electricity used to grow food. Processing, harvesting crops, dispatching animals, or the energy used in creating secondary foods such as dairy products. Transportation, this includes from farms to processing plants and then onto retail units, and finally from the shops to your home. Storage and cooking, the electricity involved in refrigerating and then cooking the food you bought. And then waste, this is both the food you throw away and any old sold food that is disposed of by retailers. Each stage will have a different impact on a food's carbon footprint. Knowing how and where food is produced is important, as the same food can have huge differences in their environmental impact. For example, beef cattle raised on deforested land is responsible for 12 times more greenhouse emissions than cows reared on natural pastures. So the average beef from South America results in 3 times the amount of greenhouse gases as beef produced in Europe and uses 10 times as much land. And this results in Latin America having the highest impact of all of the beef producing areas. So as you can see by the graph, Latin America's emissions and water usage are the highest, but also their land use is also the second highest. Compare that to that of Europe, where the emissions are considerably less, the land use is all but a fraction, and water use is less than half. Where does that food come from? Well, you may ask, why isn't the UK producing all of its food and thus cutting down on food miles? But in 2020, the UK imported 46% of the food it consumed. If you look at, for instance, the picture there and look at lamb, we're roughly equivalent. We produce the amount that we consume, but we export 374 million, but we import slightly more, 412 million. No one country provided more than 11% of those imports, and by value 48 billion of the food, feed and drink was imported and 21.4 billion was exported. This is all about our carbon footprint. So Foods with the lowest greenhouse gas emissions are plants and vegetables. But how these crops are produced can also create huge variations in their carbon footprint. For example, strawberries, buying from a local pick your own farm shop in the summer will have a very low emission and so a much smaller carbon footprint. But if you're buying out of season strawberries grown in the UK in hot houses, where this will have a much larger carbon footprint due to the energy and fertilizers needed to produce them. One of the best ways to lower your carbon footprint is to buy from local producers. In Northamptonshire, we have a collective of local producers called Made in Northamptonshire. It's a county-wide networking group that brings and supports local businesses and individuals from the local food and drink sector. In December 2020, Made in Northamptonshire opened its first shop at Rushton Lakes, stocking loads and loads of local produce from jams to beers to flatbreads. And they've recently also opened a part of a shop in Elsbarton called Jay's. But unless you're buying from Made in Northamptonshire or a local farmer's market or buying directly from the producer, or if the producer chooses to tell you, it's almost impossible to know how far your food has travelled. As you can see by the picture, there's huge variance in the amount and the different modes of transport that food can travel. So for instance, bananas, the average, and this is the average, it could be more, it could be less depending on which bananas you get. The average is 5,523 miles, and it's usually done by air because it's quite a delicate fruit that may go off. Strawberries, less miles, less than 1,000 miles, and quite often by boat because it doesn't have to go far. But UK law doesn't require manufacturers to tell us about their journeys. It does require where meat, fish and seafood have come from, and the UK law requires a label to be put on those produces to show the country of origin. But that doesn't tell you how it was imported and where else it has been. It would be much more useful to have a carbon footprint label that shows the total of the carbon footprint, and this could soon become reality. The label in the picture there is actually from the biggest supermarket in the UK, Tesco's, who did trial doing this to all of their products, but unfortunately have recently pulled it because it was costing them too much money and time to actually get this done. But companies like Corn have just started, well, in 2020 they've started labelling with a similar label to give people the idea of how much their products are actually producing in the way of emissions. And the good news is that other manufacturers aren't far behind, including the manufacturers of Bisco and Kit Kat, who are now considering how to add carbon footprints to their packaging. In 2019, when compared to total emissions from all sectors, agriculture was the source of 10% of greenhouse gas emissions. But that's only half the story. If you compare the carbon dioxide emissions with all of the other sectors, it's only responsible for 1.7%. Where it does fall down is it produces 68% of nitrous oxide emissions and 47% of methane emissions, both of which are much more potent greenhouse gas emissions. So where does nitrous oxide come from? The principal culprit is agricultural soil due to the synthetic nitrogen fertilizer used. Nitrous oxide is 265 more potent than carbon dioxide at heating the atmosphere. Like CO2, it spends 114 years in the sky before disintegrating, and it also depletes the ozone layer. The worrying thing is that global emissions have actually risen in the last 40 years by 30%. It's also worth pointing out the picture on the side there that methane is also 28 times more potent than carbon dioxide. Where does methane come from? Well, my comic illustration shows that it comes from one end of a cow. It actually comes from the other end. Cows tend to burp up to 100 kilograms, or on average 100 kilograms of methane every year. And if you extend this to the estimated population of the whole world's population of cattle, which is about 1 billion, they are responsible for 100 trillion kilograms of methane each and every year. How much climate impact does food actually have? If you take all of the impact that everything does in the entire world, food has 26% of that impact, so more than a quarter. And more than half of those emissions come from animal products, being at 58%. This graph is really interesting, quite cute, but it does show that for every kilogram of a product you get and you eat, this is how much kilogram of carbon is produced. So as you can see, lamb and beef contribute a lot more than broccoli and tomatoes. As you can see, lamb is just under 40 kilograms per kilogram consumed, whereas tomatoes is about 1.5 kilograms per kilogram of consumed. So why cut out meat and dairy? Well, again, we're taking you on a bit of a journey here. You can see the grams per 110 grams of food in the numbers just below the names of the different items. But actually, it's possibly more interesting to look at the kilometers traveled per meal-sized portion of each item. So, for instance, 110 grams of lentils will be less than a kilometre. It's about 0.2 of a kilometre. But if you compare that to beef, that's 11 kilometres of exactly the same portion. This year for veganuary, 350,000 people who took part in veganuary would have saved as much greenhouse emissions just for doing it for the month as taking 160,000 cars off the road. So as you can see, the reason for cutting out meat and dairy, for many, the environment is the biggest factor. And that's because plant-based diets help fight climate change. Avoiding meat and dairy products is one of the biggest ways to reduce your environmental impact, according to recent scientific studies. Switching to a plant-based diet can help fight climate change, according to a major report by the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which says the West's high consumption of meat and dairy is fueling global warming. And as the chart says on the right there, animal products are responsible for 76% of carbon by food group. And you can see there as well that legumes is only 2%. Legumes, obviously potatoes and underground vegetables. Here's a bit of a cheeky graph from America, but if you can imagine, a stone is 14 pounds. If you're looking at what an average daily amount of carbon that comes out of a vegan is, less than half of a stone a day, which is still an amazing amount. If you look at a meat eater's carbon footprint for every day, they are emitting on average about a stone a day in carbon, which is truly shocking. Of course, things are only going to get worse because population growth needs are going to increase. the climate change that we're seeing is making more land unfarmable. So with population due to rise by 9.7 billion by 2050, we're consuming natural resources faster than the Earth can replenish them already. Without change, by 2050, we're going to need 3 worlds to feed our current needs. And this is because the global demand for meat and eggs is actually rising rather than shrinking. So if you compare 2005 to 2050, the expected demand in 2050, poultry is just gone more than double from the 82 million tonnes in 2005 to the expected 181 million tonnes in 2050. As you can see, eggs has grown, everything on that graph has grown. And of course, that means we're going to need to use more resources and find more food for these animals to actually supply all of these items. And how much water is produced to produce food? To produce 1 kilogram of food, beef needs more than 5 times that of more water than 1 kilogram of chicken, and over 60 times more water than 1 kilogram of potatoes. Talking about liquids, you might think that almond milk uses an awful lot of water and that soy milk uses a lot of land. Well, this graph demonstrates the differences between dairy milk and its alternatives. Did you know that it takes 74 litres of water, to make 1 single glass of almond milk? Rice milk is also quite thirsty, needing 54 litres of water per glass. But if you compare those to dairy milk, these numbers are still quite low, and they are and soya and oat milk is far lower. As we touched on a minute ago, global land use for food production is going to need to increase if we are going to have to sustain people's diets as they are by 2050. But this is a graph based on current land use. So if you take the world as a whole, only 29% of the Earth's surface is land, and only 71% of that is habitable or farmable, the rest being either barren like deserts or frozen like glaciers. And 50% of that habitable land is already being used for agriculture. 37% is forests, with 11% being scrub, 1% being freshwater, 1% urban and built up areas. But looking at that 50% used by agriculture, 77% of that 50% is being used by or for livestock, meats and dairy. And that includes the amount of land that's actually used to grow food for that livestock. That only leaves 23% for crops. So if you look at the calorific supply based on that, 83% of our calories come from plant-based food, from the 23% that's used for crops. A wives' tale that could be disposed is that a lot of protein comes from meat and dairy. Well, actually, only 37% of the globe's protein supply comes from meat and dairy, with 63% coming from plant-based foods. So you can see the current system is very efficient because we are over relying on the production of meat and dairy. What's this doing to the world? Well, the world, as we've just seen, is mostly oceans, and unfortunately we've pillaged the oceans of fish to the tune where there isn't actually sort of any fish in the ocean anymore. There's not enough. So over the last century, the world's annual fish catch has risen from 18 million tonnes to over 90 million tonnes. UK fisheries alone caught 600,000 tonnes of fish and shellfish in 2011. 40% of the global marine catch is bycatch because of laws trying to limit the amount of fish that's being caught. But what happens to this bycatch? It's chucked over the side dead as a result of incidental capture. Today, almost 50% of fish consumption worldwide is from fish farms. By 2030, an additional 23 million tonnes of fish will be needed to maintain current levels of fish consumption and to cope with increased world population. Unfortunately, because we haven't got any fish in the oceans anymore, or not enough, this is going to have to come from fish farms. So let's come back to the land and let's look at the UK. The UK is made up of 4 nations, each of which have very different land uses. Look at farmland in the 4 nations. We've got England and Northern Ireland at 72%, but Scotland at only 26%. As a whole, most of the UK land mass is actually devoted to agriculture, being 57%. 25%, a quarter of all land mass, is arable cropland. Just over a third, 35%, might be termed natural or semi-natural, but that does also include some farmland where farmers graze their sheep. As you can see by the map, this is an illustration of where crops are grown in the UK. If you look towards the east, it's mainly arable. If you look towards the Midlands and the west, it's either mixed or it's cattle, i.e. grazing. See, the drier, more calm weather environment on the east is very good for growing, and also the soils are better for it. But livestock eat more than half of the 20 million tonnes of cereal that we as a country consume. That's over 50% of wheat and over 60% of barley that's grown in this country. 55% of that cropland that we were talking about earlier is currently used to produce animal feed. Now just imagine if we could use those crops for human consumption. We can more than provide for the calorific and protein and nutritional needs for our entire population. This would greatly enhance our food self-sufficiency and food security, which is a big issue at the moment. If you look at the charts of the 4 nations there, you can see that actually a lot of it is grass or rough grazing, with England having a considerable chunk, i.e. 45%, that is available for cropland. But even in England, you're looking at 41% grass and 9% as rough grazing. So if we produce less animals for food, we'd have fewer animals which grazing the land, which could mean that that land that is no longer grazed could be rewilded, providing a huge win for biodiversity, reversing years of declining numbers. It could also offset up to 9 years of current carbon dioxide emissions. This would be a huge win, providing extra land for dwindling wildlife in the UK. As you can see by the numbers on the picture there, the proportion of animal species in the UK that's been declining since 2002 is 53%. 66% of there's been a reduction of 66% in the number of hedgehogs since 1995. Perhaps more shockingly, a reduction in the species declining of butterflies of 70%. One way of changing the way we behave towards agriculture and actually producing food and looking after the earth is called permaculture, a kind of permanent agriculture. It's a design approach based on understanding of how nature works. It has 3 ethics. As you can see by the picture in the middle, it's got earth care, people care, and fair shares. And then it has 12 tools, if you like, 12 ways to do this that are dotted around the central 3. A nice quote from their website, which is permaculture.org.uk, is tread lightly on our planet in harmony with nature. And a lot of what permaculture is suggesting is growing organically. And the essence of growing organically is to work within natural systems and cycles. The basic principle of growing organically is that soil is important as the plant it supports. The 2 graphs there compare conventional farming in the slightly smaller picture and organic farming. And as you can see, in every field, the benefits of organic farming far outweigh the benefits of conventional farming. You've got safer workspaces for workers. You've got better biodiversity, minimizing energy use. Your yields and your nutritional quality isn't really affected, but everything else is, just by thinking about the way you're doing it and not using synthetic fertilizers. Of course, growing food for yourself is inherently eco-friendly. More so, of course, if you're growing vegetables without using any type of chemical. Growing organically means sparing the earth of pollution in the water, soil and air. And since you're buying less produce from the supermarket, you're not contributing to the use of fossil fuel from transporting fruits and vegetables to your local grocery. Of course, you can grow an allotment or even join us at ours. Did you know that there are over 20 allotment associations in the old borough of Wellingborough? It includes villages like Irchester and Wollaston. Associations will rent you a small plot from between £20 and £40, or of course you can join us at our community allotment. Wellingborough Eco Group have taken on a plot at Ladywell Allotments in Wellingborough to give people the chance to share skills, grow plants and enjoy working together. Join our working parties every Wednesday afternoon and on some Saturdays. In our second part, we're talking about food not wasted. During our workshop, this was presented by Mary from Redeemed Funds. Wasted food is literally driving those of us who care about the environment and people completely bananas. Did you know that every day we waste 20 million slices of bread? This creates the equivalent greenhouse gas emissions of over 140,000 cars every year. In the UK, households waste 6.6 million tonnes of food and 4.5 million tonnes of edible food. That amount of edible food that's been wasted could fill 8 Wembley stadiums. And that's just in the UK, that amount of food. And who is it up to save food? It's up to us. By cutting food waste, the average UK household could save £500 a year and positively contribute to the UK's waste reduction targets. When food breaks down at landfill sites, it does anaerobically. It releases gases like methane into the atmosphere. Around 8 to 10% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions relate to food waste. 70% of the food that is wasted in the UK is wasted by people in their own homes. 50 million chickens each year in the UK are wasted. 1/3 of all the food produced across the world is lost or wasted. 100 million pints of milk are tipped down the drain every year in the UK, and 240,000 tonnes of food is wasted by UK supermarkets every year. Of course, supermarkets rightly get a lot of criticism for the way they present and sell food, use sell-by dates and reject food and veg that doesn't look quite right. However, some of them are starting to do things to try and cut waste. Good example of this is in 2020, Tesco became the first major supermarket in the UK to team up with an app to allow sharing of food rather than throwing it in the bin. This app's called Olio, and volunteers can go to Tesco, they sign up for a slot, they go to Tesco's and other supermarkets now to collect the food that is being wasted, i.e. it's just gone past their best before date. They can then give it to people for the rest of that day, their neighbours, their friends or other community groups, completely for free. Saving food waste in Wellingborough, one of the absolute champions of this is Redeem Funds, and they work in partnership with a scheme called Fair Share. Redeem Funds collect surplus food from different supermarkets like Tesco's, Waitrose and others, and redistribute them to families in our community. Just after they'd started in October 2021, Redeem Funds managed to save 14,684 kilograms of food going to landfill. If you compare that with the figures that they've just produced, they've now saved 75,424 kilograms of food. So in 10 months, they've saved almost 60,000, they've saved more than 60,000 kilograms of food going to waste. They've also saved lots of carbon dioxide, given lots of families meals in the town, and helped a lot of needy families with a regular supply of fruits, veggies and breads. And they do that from 2 sites on the Queensway estate in Wellingborough. Redeem Funds is a food bank operating from Wellingborough. They support on average 60 families on a regular basis with food parcels every week. Families who receive food parcels have been referred by welfare agencies. They've also got a stall outside 2 of their outlets in Wellingborough that offer fresh bread, fruit and vegetables 7 days a week. Redeem Funds also support other groups, including Wellingborough Eco Group's Food Sharers, by sharing food donations. Food Sharers is a relatively new project that's a sharing community that are focused on saving food from going in the bin and sharing people who want it completely for free. Food Sharers isn't a food bank, it's a food reuse project that's open to anybody, that mutually benefits everybody, including organisations, people, and of course the planet too. But of course, even with these food sharers, there's still going to be food waste, which in bygone times wasn't a problem. The world's been recycling food and plant waste, organic waste for billions of years, but humans have interrupted that circular system by entombing valuable nutrients in landfills. If it was left to compost on the surface of the earth or in heaps, it's fine, it would decompose, it would produce some carbon dioxide, but it would make nice compost. The landfill makes it anaerobically digest. We can solve that by actually having a facility that does this process, which can break down food waste into a mix of water solids and also produce methane, i.e. biogas, that can actually be used to fuel our cars and heating systems. In our third section, we're going to be talking about packaging, and in our workshop, this was originally presented by Kerry from Food for Thought. Food packaging is such a waste. Most of it is completely unnecessary. The picture here shows what, on the left side, what currently is the state of play. Everything tends to have plastic on it these days. On the right hand side is something that somebody from the 60s and 70s might have been a bit more used to seeing, and something that we can move back to. Unfortunately, a quarter of all domestic waste is packaging, which can be difficult or even impossible to recycle. Plastic is particularly harmful to wildlife, both on land and in the ocean. Plastic at sea is everywhere. It's ubiquitous. It's in every ocean, including the Arctic and Antarctic. It's estimated that 8 million tons of plastic gets into our oceans every year. And if nothing is done to change how we dispose of plastic, there'll be more plastic by weight than fish in our oceans by 2050, or even some people are saying that could be much sooner. Just to give you an idea of what we're talking about, just with piles of plastic bottles, you can see by the graphs that every hour 54.9 million plastic bottles are bought worldwide. That pile would be higher than the Christ the Redeemer at Rio de Janeiro. Every day, 1.3 billion plastic bottles are bought worldwide. That's the equivalent size of the Eiffel Tower. In a full year, 481.6 billion plastic bottles are bought worldwide. That dwarfs the world's tallest building. The average London adult buys 3 plastic bottles every week, and that works out to be a startling 175 bottles every year per person in London. In total, some 7.7 billion plastic bottles are brought across the UK every year, resulting in substantial amounts of single-use plastic waste. Shops like Food for Thought at Nencourt in Wellingborough have been set up to offer zero waste alternatives, to reduce plastic pollution and to celebrate local made produce. At Food for Thought, Kerry offers you the opportunity to buy loose and eco-friendly goods such as foodstuffs, self-care and cleaning products. You simply weigh, fill and pay for what you need. So save your jars and bottles, wash them out and refill at Food for Thought. Some nice pictures of Kerry's shop, and of course Kerry herself showing it all off, as she rightly should do. But we still have restaurants that are going to produce a lot of waste. As you can see, 68% of their waste is organic, i.e. the food. But it's estimated that consumers who purchase fast food for lunch generate about 11 billion tonnes of packaging waste just in the UK every year. A recent survey of 1,200 workers found that the average lunch order had 4 packaged items, including sandwiches, crisps and snacks. In our fourth section, we're going to be looking at litter, because almost all litter is food packaging. And unfortunately, litter's everywhere. More than 2 million pieces of litter are dropped in the UK every day. That's at a cost to taxpayers for street cleaning of over £1 billion a year. Litter is anything from a crisp packet or a cigarette butt to a bag of rubbish. Common littering items include fast food packaging, sweet wrappers, drink cans, bottles, and cigarette butts. Of course, litter doesn't clean itself away. It can take years to degrade, causing mass harm to wildlife and habitats. Food people drop, whether it's half-eaten burgers, chips, or apple cores, can attract pigeons and vermin such as rats. In a recent study from Keep Britain Tidy, they estimated that 2.9 million small animals, including shrews, hedgehogs, and voles, are dying every year after getting stuck in packaging like bottles and cans that's just thrown into grassland and parks. But local people are starting to challenge this. Local people are finding that councils aren't doing enough to tidy up their areas. So groups like Wellingborough Eco Group, in conjunction with Welly Wombles, are organising monthly litter picks. Last month, the 20 litter heroes that took part in July's group pick picked 56 bags full of litter, a chair, carpet, and a shopping trolley. Individual Wombles picked a further 139 bags, taking the total for both groups to 195 bags in July. Both groups have picked 1,595 bags full of litter this year so far, just in Wellingborough. And we've only had 7 months. Of course, that's a lot of rubbish, and somebody's got to collect it. So this section is all about the collection and management waste. It's important to look at what is rubbish. Rubbish is anything from a crisp packet to a cigarette butt to a broken toy. Rubbish can be solid, it can be liquid, it can be gas, and it's sometimes just called waste. People usually talk about 3 different types of rubbish: domestic, from households; industrial or commercial, from factories, offices and shops; hazardous, rubbish that needs to be stowed carefully to prevent pollution. And whilst you're tossing your rubbish, what is rubbish actually made of? Rubbish is made of different substances and materials, of course, but some of those materials are biodegradable. They break down naturally in the environment and eventually disappear, like leftover food and paper. But a lot of it is non-biodegradable, like drinks cans and plastic bottles. These do not break down naturally in our environment. It's a rubbish problem, and it's a problem that's been around as long as modern civilization has existed. We humans produce a lot of it, which is bad for the environment and takes up precious space. And despite our best efforts to combat the problem over the past few decades by reducing, reusing and recycling, there's still a long way to go. Recycling was increasing, but it isn't anymore. Household waste recycling rates in England had risen from around 11% in 2001 to about 45%. Recycling rates in construction have also improved over the same period, but since 2013, rates for both have plateaued. Collected waste from households in England hasn't really changed either since 2015. In fact, there's been a small increase in the amount of waste food that's been collected rather than going into residual waste, i.e. landfill bins. But apart from that, the other figures remain broadly the same. What's in a recycling bin? The amount of rubbish we throw away is increasing due to changes in things like lifestyle and increasing population, but recycling isn't. We need to increase the amount of rubbish that is recycled because we cannot burn it or put it in landfill forever. And the graph shows what is being collected, what type of waste is being collected. You can see that there's very little difference in what's being collected over the last 5 years, from 2015 to 2019. Not much has changed. But one thing that has changed is the destination of local authority collected waste, mainly because they've put a tax on it from about 2010. This has incentivised councils to not put it in landfill anymore. And as you can see, and as you'd be able to see a bit more clearly if my picture wasn't in the way, the amount of landfill has dramatically decreased since 2010. But what has massively increased is the incineration of waste, either with or without EFW. Unfortunately, as I said before, recycling and other ways of getting waste hasn't really changed at all. So what is incineration with EFW? An EFW is a facility where non-recyclable waste is burned with the resulting steam powering a turbine which generates electricity. So some EFW plants are also able to provide direct heating for local properties. The waste going to an EFW would otherwise be disposed of in landfill sites, but the problem with this, as you can see by the picture, is that it does cause pollution. The map shows the predicted state of pollution from two imposed incinerators in Corby, one at Grettonbrook Road and one at Shelton Road, that have been approved for about 10 years, but they've not been built yet. As you can see, the plume from these can go over many miles, with the higher rates of pollution being felt by local residents. And in our sixth and final segment, we'll be looking at solutions to this. Reduce, reuse, repair and recycle, rethinking rubbish, and not wasting and not wanting stuff. The slogan reduce, reuse, repair and recycle is an approach to the waste hierarchy that seeks to be as ecologically appropriate as possible and maximise the value and use of a resource. It can sometimes be shortened to reduce, reuse, recycle, and sometimes a fifth R is added, such as refuse, remanufacture, recover, restore, redesign, repurpose, and even rot for compost. You see by the fancy sort of flower shaped pictogram on the side there, is it's all about rethinking what you're doing with your waste, being mindful of your consumption, your relationship with things and your relationship with the earth. So starting with refusing items that you don't need and reduce what you do need. Reuse as much as you can and repair stuff that is broken but is fixable. Re-gift items that you don't want anymore. Recover energy and materials. Recycle when the other options have been exhausted, so that the cycle can continue. And reduce is first one of those four of the slogan to look at. So this is when people purchase less stuff. So it reduces the amount of energy required to manufacture and transport stuff. Initiatives, are introduced to encourage people to turn off lights, to share lifts, to take shorter showers in order to reduce energy. Much more can be found out about ways to save energy with a project from Wellingborough Eco Group called Energy Savers. It is there to help people reduce their energy use, and more can be found out about Energy Savers at energysavers.org.uk. Reuse is a massive thing. This occurs when people use different materials again and again, but do not convert them into different products. Think reusable coffee cup instead of throwing away disposable cup every time. Swapping and sharing is another way to reuse. This can be done at Wellingborough's Swap Shop. It takes place every Tuesday between 2 and 6 at Glannis Hall's community room, but it can also be done at lots of charity shops and between neighbours, sharing things, reusing things at the allotment, for instance. Just caring and sharing and making the use out of everything until it is no longer of any use. And when things aren't of any use, could they be repaired? Instead of tossing your old devices, clothes and other items, consider repairing them. Look for a local repair shop. Perhaps repair it yourself if you can. Find a friend or family member or somebody at work who's good at fixing things and repay them by offering a service. Another option, a fairly new option, is repair cafes are popping up everywhere. We've got one in Wellingborough on the second Saturday of every month between 9 and 12 at Glannis Hall with their indoor car boot sale. Repair cafes offer to repair your items completely free to reduce the amount of waste going to landfill. Of course, when items can no longer be reduced, recycled, repaired, recycling is the option to go for, and it saves a considerable amount of energy. These items in the picture there are items that can be recycled in a Wellingborough green bin, pretty much the same as any other council collection service in the UK. When materials are collected from your green bin and separated into different components, ingredients if you like, these can be remade into different products. Energy is required to recycle the product and to change its physical properties into something different, but this is much less than the energy required to produce new and virgin versions of the same material. For example, plastic from bottles might be made into public benches or even fleece jackets. The problem is we need to start doing this more. We need to start recycling more rather than burning or put stuff in landfill. We need to increase the recycling rates by collecting more materials in recycling bin. We need to build more recycling plants. We need to educate people about what can be recycled and find ways of turning recycled materials into useful items. Problem is that a lot of us are wish cyclers. You know, those items that you've always wanted to recycle, but were never actually sure about, but you put it in the green bin anyway. Things like crisp packets, toothpaste tubes, pens. None of these can actually be recycled through the majority of household waste collections. But the good news is there are people that can recycle these items. You can recycle your soft plastics at supermarkets. Soft plastics are the lightweight plastics that cannot often be put into your recycling bins at home. Certainly Wellingborough won't recycle them. Things like plastic film lids, soft fruit punnets, ready meal containers, as well as plastic pasta bags and chocolate and sweet wrappers. To recycle, just take your soft plastics to your local Co-op, Tesco, Sainsbury's or M&S or other supermarkets that offer these services to recycle soft plastics like crisp packets and bread bags. Doesn't actually matter where you bought them, just pop the plastics into the recycling units that are available. And apart from soft plastics, of course, there's a whole host of other items that can't be recycled at home or at supermarkets. These items can be recycled at local centres, and in Wellingborough, Glamis Hall are doing this for you. These include items like stamps, bras, batteries, toothbrushes, toothbrush tubes, pens, correction fluid containers, and some hygiene packaging can all be taken to the Glamis Hall Community Centre on Goldsmith Road. And if they can't do it, then there are other places again that will be able to do it. And in Wellingborough, we've got a guide made by Wellingborough Eco Group called Wellingborough Eco Map. It's a guide of all eco-friendly places and facilities in the town and the surrounding Northamptonshire, including recycling centres and shops that recycle things that don't go in the green recycling bins. Visit the website at wellingboroughecogroup.org.uk/map and click on the map items or cycle paths to find out more about them. All the services featured on the map and more have a page on this dedicated website. Many also include short videos from the people that are providing these services, telling you all about what they do. So find out more at wellingboroughecogroup.org.uk/map. As we said before, recycling stuff does use energy. Reusing stuff, of course, uses no energy at all, but recycling is an excellent way of saving energy. Did you know that one recycled tin would save enough energy to power a television for 3 hours? One recycled glass bottle would save enough energy to power a computer for 25 minutes. One recycled plastic bottle would save enough energy to power a 60-watt light bulb for 3 hours. And 70% less energy is required to recycle paper compared to making it from raw materials. It's quite an astounding amount that 1 kilogram of paper recycled saves 1 kilogram of carbon dioxide equivalent being emitted. All we're asking you to do is to consider a better way, a circular economy, thinking about production, distribution and consumption, but also thinking about the waste and diverting that waste away from the recycling sector, and then, if necessary, the recycling sector diverting that away from landfill or burning. You can do this by reducing resources, by efficiently and reducing the amount of waste that we create as a society. Prolong the lives of materials and goods that we use. Keep resources in use for as long as possible so we extract the maximum value from them. We should recover and regenerate products and materials whenever we can by giving them a new lease of life. And that's it, everybody. Thank you very much for watching this Wellingborough Climate Action Project Sustainability Workshop presentation. If you have any questions for me, please do email info@wcap wcap.org.uk, or visit the website, which is wcap.org.uk. Just click the code on the screen with your phone. Thank you all, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.